Hi, everyone in American government and political science. This is my fourth attempt to put up a video. I've been in front of the camera now for about 4 hours, and I've hit points along the way where I was just totally dissatisfied in what I was speaking about. I've erased those. I'm starting fresh, so hopefully I can get through fairly clean and be succinct in summary fashion. We're on the chapter dealing with the Congress, our legislative body, the branch of government that creates laws. And we can debate all day long, but there's a clear intent that our framers had when it came to the legislature, the Congress, that it would be the most important, the most significant, and the most representative body of government. There's no question. A lot of people have been taught, I've been taught this, and I think most people believe, many very educated people believe, we have three co-equal branches of government. I have to admit, the branches of government have evolved in terms of their power and their jurisdiction and their role within our society. But at the inception of our nation, the framers wanted the legislature to be the most representative and the most powerful. There's no question about it. It's a lawmaking branch, and we were breaking away from too much concentrated rule in somebody like a monarch. And so we wanted to disperse power, and we thought dispersing the power in a representative body would be the most appropriate. And that's what we came up with, was the Congress. A lot of people that talk about the framework of the legislature seem to suggest that when they went to the Constitutional Convention down in 1787 down in Philadelphia, they had nothing to work with, and they came up with this original idea of creating a bicameral body to create checks and balances within that branch of government in and of itself. It's not entirely true. They've been dealt with, or they've been had experiences to work off of in many other nations, including Great Britain. And we had all of our state governments, which were really almost sovereign nations before we decided to create the United States of America and give more power to the centralized government. The state of Massachusetts, for example, has a bicameral legislature where laws must go through both the House of Representatives and the upper chamber called the Senate before it even gets presented to the governor for either vetoing or for signing. So the framework of government had examples out there already. But what we liked about it was there would be checks and balances within the body itself. One is that there's going to be two branches. Both have to deal with a potential bill, and they both have to agree with the exact language of the bill and what its meanings will be in order for them to vote on it together at the end. So the House of Representatives might come out with a bill that says XYZ. The Senate will be taking up that same bill, but by the time it comes out, it says G, H, and L. They are not mirror image, and if they're not mirror image, they don't have what? They don't have a bill that both the House and the Senate have passed. They need both to pass it. That's an internal check. It's big because the interests, the goals, and the philosophy of the Senate can often be different than the House of Representatives, even if the same party is representative in both branches. The framers intended the House of Representatives to be the more democratic representative body. Their people, the citizens who had the power to vote, would actually pick the representatives from their community. Up until 1913, the Senate, the upper house, would be chosen by your state legislatures. Well, people are surprised by that. It was pretty much an undemocratic body. Indirectly, it was democratic because you voted for your state representatives and your state legislature, and then they would pick your U.S. senator. Why did the framers do that? They thought that your own government that was working in the nitty-gritty of governance would know who would be the most wise, educated, thoughtful citizenry to be sent to the Senate. We become more democratized. Now we vote for the Senate directly. That check and balance within the House and the Senate is remarkable because the Congress can be really gung-ho about something, meaning the House of Representatives. I should call it Congress because the Congress is both the Senate and the House. But the House of Representatives might really think they got a great idea. A bill goes all the way through, goes through all the subcommittees, all the debates done. It gets passed in a very wide margin. And then it goes to the Senate. What can the Senate do? They can alter it significantly or they can reject it entirely. So what happened to that bill? It's dead. It's gone. The framers wanted that. Many of us sometimes reflect and don't like it when Congress seems to be spinning its wheels. All these proposed legislations going there and nothing seems to get done. That's what the framers intended. Because if there's not a consensus between the Senate and the House on what should be done or ought not to be done or changed or altered, then it should be left alone. And that's what the framers wanted. So sometimes staying still is exactly what the goal of the framers would be. Most of us disagree because we pay a lot of money for our government. And when our government doesn't seem to be able to get anything done, we get very, very frustrated. But at the same time, the government shouldn't be passing laws willy-nilly just on a whim unless there's a consensus between the two bodies. And I'm going to put up a real corny video. I didn't make it. Some of you already have experienced it. And I got to admit, for a kid's video, I think it was designed for junior high school kids, it's pretty damn good in terms of its content. And that's Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill. Because when a bill gets proposed, anybody in the nation, any individual, even a foreigner, can come in and propose a bill. But some member of the House of Representatives or some member of the Senate has to propose it in the formal body. There's no mechanism that requires that a bill start in either the House of Representatives or the Senate unless it relates to appropriation and taxation. Then it does have to start in the House of Representatives. It doesn't really change much, and it's more of a philosophical concept because in the end, both the Senate and the House still have to approve it. But other than that, other than appropriations bills, a bill can start in the Senate and then work its way to the House, and vice versa. A bill can start in the House and work its way to the Senate. What do we know in the end? Both have to have a majority approval in order for it to be presented to the president for either adoption, signature, or rejection, which is a veto. And there's one called a pocket veto. Basically, the president refuses to sign it within a certain time frame and it dies of its own accord. And the other is an overt veto. And it's more political that way because if it's a fairly popular bill and the president doesn't want to come out on like sort of the bully pulpit and say, I condemn this bill and I'm going to veto it, as opposed to that, they might just let it sit and die its own accord, and therefore they don't get quite the perception in the public eye that they were against the popular principles that were in that bill. Now, one of the things I don't talk about too much, the book does a really nice job. It's dry and boring, but it's very significant. There are internal rules, both within the House of Representatives and the Senate, upon which a bill gets processed. And that's why it's important to know who the leader of each party is in the majority in either the House of Representatives or in the Senate. That's why if you hear all this political discussion, goes, maybe the Democrats will take over the Senate, maybe the Republicans will take over the House, and vice versa. What does it matter if they have to go through this process? It matters because the majority leader in the House, that's what we call the Speaker of the House, and the majority leader in the Senate, we just call them the majority leader, they get to determine who sits on what committees and which committee will actually start the process of approving and discussing a bill. And that process in and of itself could either benefit or hinder the passage of a bill. They have a lot of power. And so, for instance, who cares about Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell in the Senate Majority Leader? Why do we care? They're just one vote. They're also controlling the processes by which both branches of the legislature entertain bills, and they can have a huge impact on whether or not the bill dies within committee, gets reported out, or even gets entertained on the floor for a full vote. I know that language may sound very foreign to you, but it's kind of like setting up the rules of Monopoly. If you're the ruler and you can set up how the rules work, you can create a system in such a way that certain bills can get through and other bills are going to die by your structure of governance. And that's why every Congress that comes every 2 years, the House of Representatives, every House of Representatives is up for election every 2 years. They pick their leader of the House, and that person has a significant amount of control. Again, it's Nancy Pelosi in the House right now, and in the Senate, it is Mitch McConnell. A lot of power. And if you're a member of the House of Representatives that was against Nancy Pelosi or don't agree with her or don't work with her in good team fashion, you'll get put on committees that don't have a lot of power and a lot of weight, and bills that you might introduce might well get, basically flushed. It's a very, very powerful position. Obviously, public outcry will prevent some of that, but a lot of people don't know what's going on in the internal workings of some of these bills, and it doesn't get the public fanfare that would hopefully help carry the day, apply political pressure to the whole body, and therefore have bills go through. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. That little cartoon I'm going to show you does spend a lot of time talking about, in a very entertaining way, about how a bill can die once introduced. So it can start in the Senate or in the House, unless it's in a bill for appropriation of funds or taxation, and it has to start in the House. Both the Senate and the House have to agree upon it. It is the most powerful body of government. It was meant to be. There's an argument now the president's the most powerful. That wasn't the inception. There's an argument now they are closer to being co-equal branches of government. I would still argue they're not. They're not equal, but in their sphere of influence, they are the most influential. But in overlapping areas, they act as checks and balances on one another, making them, in many senses, equitable at the table of power. So getting elected. In order to be a member of the House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 years of age. You have to be a United States citizen for 7 years, and you have to be a resident of the district upon which you're running. Well, the 25 years is easy to establish, and so is the 7 years of being a United States citizen. What's a little bit more difficult and is a little bit buried in different states is what does it take to become a resident of that community domiciled there, not just home own a home, but that's your legal resident. In some jurisdictions, it's just your intent to live there. That's all it is. You just declare, this is my intent. I want to live in Springfield, Massachusetts. I am now a resident of Springfield, Massachusetts. Other jurisdictions, and the most common one is usually you have to reside there for 6 months. I can't give you a straight answer because it depends on the state and the locality during legal residency. If you run for Congress, the House of Representatives, and you get elected, it's for a 2-year seat. Every 2 years, all members, 435, are up for election. And how do we determine 435? It's all based upon population. If the law, it's not in the Constitution, it just says that we'll have proportional representation in the House of Representatives, the Congress can create a law determining how many Congress members will be spread in the House of Representatives throughout the nation. It's been 435 for several decades. It's probably going to stay that way for a long time. How those 435 members of the House of Representatives are dispersed throughout the nation is determined by population. Massachusetts lost one about 10 years ago, maybe less than 10 years ago. We lost one, and the districts had to be redrawn, gerrymandering, to make new districts based upon population. So almost every district, some might be geographically much smaller, like Boston, but it has the same roughly amount of people that are going to be representative. We lost population in Massachusetts vis-a-vis states like Texas and Florida. They grew, so they now have more members of the House of Representatives. Thus, we lost one, like again, about 6 or 7 years ago. If you run, cost a huge amount of money. We'll get into that at the very end of the video. But if you run, you sit for a 2-year term. You're almost always running for re-election because 2 years is not a long time. And if you love history like I do, you go back, a lot of people that were helping write the Constitution at its inception thought 2 years was too long. You wanted people to be responsive to the will of the people. In order to be responsive to the will of the people, they thought 2 years was too long. You get too comfortable. You're not having basically the citizens breathe down your throat or your neck, breathe on the back of your neck, pressuring you to do their bidding. And they thought 2 years was too long. Some wanted to do 1 year. Some of them also wanted to be able to have their state legislatures write instructions for their federal legislators, their members of the House of Representatives, that they would have to follow certain. This is what you go and do when you're in Congress. These are the things we want you to get done, and you'd have to follow them like contractually. That never came true. So 2 years for House of Representatives. What about for Senate? What do you have to be eligible to run for the U.S. Senate? There you have to be 30 years of age. You have to be a United States citizen for 9 years, and then you have to be a resident of the state upon which you are running from. Again, residency can be either your intent to be there. You can start initially. Some other states might say you have to be there for 6 months or a year to meet eligibility for something like that. It's very interesting. There's some history of after the Reconstruction, there were some people from the North that went down south to take advantage of the political backing and get government jobs down south and help basically reconstruct the South after the Civil War. And their nickname were called carpetbaggers because much of their luggage was made out of a carpet-like design. The exterior would feel like carpet. And, well, it would be carpet. That's actually what they made luggage out of back in that era. And the term was derogatory, meaning these people are coming to take advantage of a political backing. To this day, we use that term carpetbagger for anybody that seems to relocate from one area to another just to take advantage of the political opportunities that exist. Some of the recent ones that got called carpetbaggers were Hillary Clinton, who was a citizen of Arkansas, but moved to New York State to run for U.S. Senate. Another one was our own Mitt Romney, Massachusetts. He lived in Utah for a period of time, New Hampshire for a period of time, Massachusetts for a period of time. And when he ran for governor for Massachusetts, a lot of people said he hadn't been here for a long time. He was really a resident of Utah. He won the election nonetheless, but a lot of people accused him of being a carpetbagger. One of my political heroes, a guy by the name of Robert F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. A lot of people say, well, he's from Massachusetts, grew up in Hyannisport, right? Well, he actually grew up a lot in New York, but they ultimately moved back to Massachusetts and lived in Hyannis full time. But he was the Attorney General of the United States under Lyndon Johnson after his brother became assassinated. He was still in the federal government as Attorney General, but he wanted to start his own political path. And so he wanted to run for U.S. Senate. He thought the best location was where? Well, why wouldn't he run for U.S. Senate from Massachusetts? because Teddy Kennedy was a senator from Massachusetts. I was going to run against his brother. And the other senator at the time from Massachusetts, and I can't think of who that was in that era, but it probably looked at the writing on the wall and said, I can't run against that person. They're a popular Democratic Party member. I don't want to remember party politics plays an important role. So we saw a political vacuum in New York, ran for U.S. Senate in New York and won. It was a United States senator from New York when he ultimately decided to run for president and became assassinated in 68. But the U.S. Senate sits for 6 years. Why? Well, this is new. Up until 1913, we did not elect our U.S. senators. Our U.S. senators were actually picked by our state governors, our governments. Our state legislature would get back to Bengals. Who are the wisest people within our state? Who are the most thoughtful, mature, and educated? Who's going to do a really good job for the state of Massachusetts? And if I was a state legislator for Massachusetts, I'd get together with my other state legislators and we'd pick them. That's what the U.S. Constitution required. State legislatures would pick their 2 U.S. senators. That existed until 1913. We've become more democratized. Now it's a more representative body than it ever was. We now pick our U.S. senators. That's because of the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution. What's interesting about that is it's a 6-year term, but our framers wanted to create some stability in government. So it's not every 6 years, all U.S. senators, all 100 are for election. What they did was they started at the inception of our country, I think at the election of 1792, I'm not sure which, but somewhere around there, they said, in this first election cycle, some will be elected for 2 years, 1/3 of the nation be 2 years, 1/3 of the nation be 4 years, and 1/3 of the nation will have a 6-year term. Upon re-election, they'll all serve a 6-year term at the next election. Therefore, 1/3 of all U.S. senators are up for election every 2 years. But upon election, they serve for how long? 6 years. It's staggered. So if we want to throw out our U.S. senators, a 2-year cycle comes up, we can only throw out 1/3 this 2-year cycle, another third in the next 2-year cycle, and again, the last cycle will be 2 years beyond that. That creates stability. We can't, on a heated moment, basically throw everybody out of government. We want to keep some stability in there. And so, therefore, the U.S. Senate is a staggered body. Everybody serves 6 years, but they're staggered by 2-year differentials for 1/3 of the Senate all the way through. A lot of math there, but you guys get what I said. Basically, they're not all for election every cycle. 1/3 is up for election every cycle. It's a 6-year term. Again, there's slightly different ages. And we got to remember back then when the framers were thinking about it, you could be a little less, I guess, mature if you ran for the House of Representatives, and you could be hopefully a little bit more aged and thoughtful and mature if you ran for the U.S. Senate at the age of 30. And back then, 30 and 25 were much older than today's 30 and 25 in terms of the way we looked at things, in terms of life expectancy and stages in life. Very, very different. But the big checks and balances on this, well, we know when the Senate and the Congress, the House of Representatives finally get through and they do come across an agreement in a bill, they send it forward to the president, and the president can either veto it, either through the pocket veto, they don't sign it within a time frame allowed in the Constitution, or they outright veto the bill. Then it's dead. Congress can try to reissue it later on, get the president to eventually resign. Seldom happens. The other is the president signs it. Now it's a law, and that's basically it. Except one other check that developed not at the time the Constitution was first written, but really through Marbury versus Madison. The courts have the power to look at a law and not say this is a bad idea, not say this is unwise, not say this is unfair. They have to look at it and say it's a violation of the Constitution. Only then will a law become null and void by the Supreme Court. A lot of people think the Supreme Court, I want to bring in the Supreme Court, it's a stupid law. I want to bring the Supreme Court because it's so expensive. I want to bring this to the Supreme Court because it's unfair to my business. You've got to cite a constitutional flaw in order to be effective at the challenge the Supreme Court, and that's part of the checks and balances. So the Congress, very difficult to run for. I know in your book it outlined it. It's basically cost over $1 million really to run for the House of Representatives seat. And you really have to do it through party affiliation. You either have to be a Democrat or Republican. It's very much unheard of for an independent, unless you're got a lot of fame by being, in an actor or a movie star or a musician or maybe a famous sports star, somebody that's got the bully pulpit and a lot of public following. Maybe then you might be able to run as independent. Very, very rare. Bernie Sanders is probably one of the exceptions to the rule. He is an independent, although he runs as a Democrat when he runs for president. In the Senate, when he runs for Senate, he's always run as as an independent. He's not a member of the political party, but he has to pick a party to caucus with, which is to participate in debating and voting upon legislation when it comes to the Congress. When it comes in, you have to pick a side to caucus with. I'm trying to think of some of the other important aspects. Oh, the Senate race will cost over $10 million. Those of you that are really interested about costs, and this is one of the things I always hate about politics, even though I love politics, you got to raise money and you got to take money probably from a lot of different entities legally. But nonetheless, I think it sullies the water when you have all these large campaign contributions coming in, and there's restrictions on how you can spend that money as a candidate. You can't say, hey, Jim, my company or my PAC, they're called PACs, usually they can donate a lot of money. They're going to donate some money to my campaign. I can't go buy hey, I'm going to buy a summer place at the Martha's Vineyard because this PAC gave me money. It has to be spent on campaign related activities, which are pretty broad though. You can buy suits. Sometimes you can rent cars and things like you pay staff. But you have to report everything. There's a lot of reporting, which I think is a good thing. But just because it has to be reported, and just because there has to be some type of transparency in this process, doesn't mean it's not ripe for abuse, because money buys elections. And just as a way of interest, our own Massachusetts, just the primary, the Senate race between Ed Markey and Joseph Kennedy cost over $30 million. So you can imagine the difficulty in raising that kind of money to run for office. I don't like it. So I'm going to post up that little video. I try to keep this video a little shorter, but you know the basic itinerary or parameters. What does the legislature do? It passes laws. There are mechanisms within both the House and the Senate by which a bill must meander through in order to go through the other branch, and the other branch has to agree to it verbatim. It has to be exactly the same. And if it becomes out exactly the same and they both endorse it by majority vote, it now becomes a bill for proposal of law in which the president either endorses or vetoes. And if they veto it, it's dead. If they endorse it, it becomes the law. And the last hope is that the court might nullify it because it's what? Against the principles in the Constitution, not because it's unwise or unpopular or any of those criteria. It has nothing to do with it. Now, can a Congress come in later on and decide that some law we had was stupid or irrelevant or inappropriate and repeal it? Yeah, that's what people keep trying, or Congresses have tried to do time and time again to the Affordable Care Act, or some people call Obamacare. It passed the Senate and the House. President Obama passed it into laws by endorsing it. The Supreme Court reviewed it, found it to be constitutional under its taxation powers. In Congress and the Senate, the House of Representatives continually introduce bills to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And what happens every single time? The president has vetoed it. Not in the current House or the Senate. I'm talking about when it was during Obama's administration. Obviously, Obama's going to veto, but they did it as a political message over and over again. The legislature is a fascinating entity, and things don't always get through. And the book does a nice job on the technical rules of it, and I don't want to bore you in a video. So hopefully this is somewhat better than what I was putting in before. It only took me 5 hours to do a 24-minute video. Be well.